Hi everyone, I wanted to talk now a bit more about Atlantis. So last week I talked about how the Minoan civilization fit the general pattern or the general picture presented by Plato about Atlantis, like the fact that the Atlanteans had control over one central island and then several others, which were the way to the opposite continent over which they held power over several parts. And then this opposite continent surrounded the ocean. So that fits the general picture of the Minoan civilization, them having control over Crete, several of the Cyclades, and then several parts of the continent, the Eurasian continent, which together with Africa surrounds the Mediterranean. But now I wanted to focus a bit more on some more specifics. So, for example, I wanted to talk about the Metropolis of Atlantis. So Plato's description is a little bit confusing because there are indications that he's actually combining two different locations, or at least that he is referring, maybe he knew he was talking about two different locations, but it's just not so clear in the text. But in one place he talks about a plain being in the centre of the island, and he refers to this plain being several thousand stadia in length and width. So that would be quite a few miles, quite a large plain, many dozens of miles. But then in another part he refers to a mountain, not very high mountain, in the centre of the island that's only 50 stadia from the coast, from the edge of the island. And so that would indicate that the island is only about 11 miles or so in diameter. So that doesn't really fit the idea at all of there being a plain several thousand stadia long and wide in the centre of the island. That just doesn't work. So it's interesting then that that one of the main islands, or that the second most important island of the Minoans, next to Crete, was the island of Santorini, also known as Thera, and that was, or is, roughly 11 miles in diameter. So that's a pretty good match. But also some other parts of the description of the Metropolis of Atlantis fit as well. For example, a well-known description of the main part of Atlantis was the fact that it was said to have been circular and to have had concentric rings around it. So there was one island in the middle, and then around it there were several rings of land, and through these rings of land there was a canal. And the length of the canal was also helps us to see that the diameter of this thing must have been about 11 miles. So logically, that particular area, that Metropolis of Atlantis, is what Plato was referring to when he referred to the mountain in the centre of the island, just 50 stadia from the coast. That fits in perfectly. So that is what generally is called the Metropolis of Atlantis, which clearly is a separate place from where the large plain was. So bearing this in mind, how does this fit in with the Minoans? Well, like I said before, Santorini was the second most important island to the Minoans after Crete. And what does Santorini look like? Well, it's a circular island, and it's a bit fragmented now, but that's because of the famous eruption about 3,500 years ago. But before that time, at the height of the Minoan Empire, or the Minoan civilization rather, it was composed of one central island, like there is now, and around it, the most commonly accepted reconstruction is that around it there was one ring of land, as it were, with a gap through it. So that's quite a good match, I think, to the idea that there was, well, to Plato's description of a central island with a small mountain, just like how Thera has this volcanic cone in the centre, and then a ring of land around it with a canal cut through it. Obviously, in the story of Atlantis, it's a man-made canal, whereas in the case of Thera, that was a natural gap in the surrounding land. But nonetheless, it's very similar, and Plato's story was written about 1,000 years after the eruption of Thera after the Minoans were wiped out. So all things considered, I think that's a reasonably good match. So next time, we'll have a look at some more specific details about the Minoans and how they tie in with some even more specific details about the Atlanteans. So now we're going from the general picture down to the specific details. So see you next time.